going to have a little look at constructing the outside of our pouch, and for this you're going to need your two external pieces. Now you can make them the same fabric or different fabric. You can use faux leather, you can use cork, you can use waxed canvas, you can use oilcloth, you can use just about anything you've got really. You will need to interface accordingly. So if you're using Quiltmate cotton, then you'll need a woven fusible interfacing. If you're using a home decor fabric, depending on how stiff or how stable the weave is, you may not need any interfacing on it. If you're using fabric, you'll probably need either a foam or a fusible fleece stabilizer. If you're using faux leather, you can sometimes get away with no additional stabilizer. It really depends on how thick your faux leather is. This is meant to be a scrap buster, so I'm not asking anybody to buy anything new. Use the knowledge that you have and use what you have to make this. Now in this instance, I found in my cupboard some really cheap, really thin automotive headliner. I guess this is perhaps, if I said it was 1.5 millimeters, I'm probably being generous. It's got a bit of substance to it, but not a huge amount. Now I tried one the other day with 2 layers, so I basted 2 layers together, and it was okay, but I felt it was a bit thick. So I'm now going to try one with 1 layer and just see how it goes. So this is a bit of an experiment. I haven't done this with 1 layer before. I have used Styleville, which is 5 millimeters thick, so it's a lot thicker. So we're kind of winging it here. And what I've done already is I have actually sew basted my foam to the wrong side of my fabric, but only basting along the bottom long edge. So not into this area, just along the bottom edges on both pieces. And now there's a reason that we do that, and you'll see what the reason is a little later on. So don't be tempted to go basting all the way around, because you will end up unpicking. Now, you will also need your 2 lining zipper tabs. Now, you can use the same fabric as your lining. I've just got a piece of fabric that's the same as my outside. It makes no difference, and actually they're not visible when the bag's completed, so it really doesn't matter what you use. I don't interface those though. They're 1.25 by 1.25. I have 8.5 inches of number 5 zipper. A number 5 zipper is what's often called a bag zipper. They're 1.25 inches from one side of the tape to the other, and the teeth are 5 millimeters width, hence a number 5. A number 4.5 will do fine. I know a lot of ladies in America use a 4.5 rather than a 5, and a 4.5 will work just as well. But you need an 8.5 inch length, and it needs to be perfectly 8.5 inch. And what I would say is just to pop a few stitches through the top edge, just to make sure that your pull stays where it's meant to be. Now, if you want to add a tag or anything else to the front, if you've been shopping at Emmeline's, then you can do that without any problems, and pop that in now. So get that ready too. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take one of our tabs and we're going to lay it right side up on the table. We're going to take our zipper and we're going to lay our zipper right side up on top of the tab, so that the zipper pull is facing upwards and the tab is also facing upwards. Now this is counterintuitive, it's not what you would normally do. Just line up the very outside edges, and we're going to stitch across the end of the zipper to join it to that zipper tab at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. That's 6 millimeters for those of you that are metric. So we've got that attached, and I'm going to do exactly the same at the other end with the second zipper tab. So I'm just going to turn that round. I'm going to put my zipper on top. If you want to clip it in place, do so. I don't clip unless I actually have to, because I just think you can waste an awful lot of time clipping. Sometimes it's essential you clip, sometimes it really isn't, and this is one of those really isn't ones. So just do a couple of lines just to make sure that that's all attached. So there we are, that's the back of my zipper with the 2 zipper tabs attached. Now I'm going to take my 2 exterior pieces, and I'm not going to necessarily do this in the same order as I do in the pattern, so you'll have to forgive me. We will get all the stages done, but perhaps not in the same order. I'm going to lay my two exterior pieces right sides together, and I'm going to very, very carefully match up the side to make sure that the top and bottom are perfectly matching. And I mean the top and the bottom of the fabric, not the top and the bottom of the foam. The foam is not important. You can trim away the foam. The fabric is important. You need those corners to match perfectly. If you're using fusible fleece for this, you'll notice that on the pattern there's a red dashed line on the main exterior pieces, and I would suggest you cut your fusible fleece to that red dashed line, which means that it won't be in the seam allowance. It makes it a lot easier to sew. So I'm going to stitch down that side using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, 3/8 of an inch being 10 millimeters. Back stitching a couple of stitches at the beginning and the end to secure. Bigger needle in here, thinking I might need a bigger needle because I've got the foam, but actually I'm not sure I do. I think I could probably have just gone with what I had in, which was a 14. I've put a 16 in, so I'm not going to change it now. So we've stitched down one side, and what I'm going to do, and we've stitched down the right hand side. What I'm going to do now is trim away all of the foam from the seam allowance on both sides. So we now have no foam in the seam allowance. Let's just move my zipper out of the way. Take my pressing mat, open up our two panels. Open up that seam. I'm just going to finger press it initially. Then I'm going to take my iron and open it up properly. Now, for anybody that's wondering, if you're in the UK, these are Aldi fat quarters. Like most people, when I first saw Aldi was doing fat quarters, I went berserk and I bought lots of them and then thought, what am I going to do with them? Because they're actually not, in my opinion, great quality. Great if you're a charity quilt maker, but I'm never quite sure how well they do because there's a lot of dressing on them. When you wash them, they become quite gutless. But do you know what? They're perfect for this. So a lot of mine have been made with Aldi fat quarters. If you're not in the UK, and you don't get fat quarters from your Aldi, sorry, they're pretty good, and you get sets of about 6 or 7 of them for less than £4, which is really, really cheap. And they're nicely coordinated. So having opened up my seam in the centre, I'm now going to top stitch down both sides of the central seam at a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. You can go closer if you want to, but I find a 1/4 of an inch is perfectly all right, because I'm going to need to top stitch the other side, but we'll be doing that midway through our construction, so it's a little more difficult to get to. So if you choose to top stitch at 1/8 of an inch, you may find it's quite difficult to do the second side at 1/8 of an inch also, because you will be sewing from sort of within the pouch. And that makes it sound quite cryptic, but you will figure it out once we get to that part. You'll see what I mean. So stitching on both sides. There we go. Right, now I'm choosing to pop in a tag at this point. Now I like to put my tag on that central seam. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn it around so I'm working from the top so you can kind of see what I'm doing, I hope. I'm going to use first of all, I'm going to figure out which of the holes on my backing plate the prongs on my tag go through. These things are often generic, so you get a nine hole one, a 4 hole one, a 2 hole one, some a 6 hole one, and I think they're often sent out by the suppliers as a sort of a generic thing, and they don't always fit through the outside holes. So this actually fits when the prongs are 90 degrees to the tag, actually fits through the first hole in on both sides. So I know that that's where I need my holes to be for my as a template, basically. So I used that backing plate as a template, and I'm making a mark. I'm going to position this 2 inches down from the top. So I'm using my ruler to figure out where 2 inches down, and I'm going to pop the backing plate onto my fabric, and I'm basically going to just mark through the holes that I know that the prongs are going to go through, which gives me 2 little marks on my fabric. Now, I know a lot of people like to use seam rippers for this. I am not very good with a seam ripper, so I'm much better using a craft knife, so that's what I use. Make sure that you use it on a suitable cutting mat though, because your dining room table will never be the same again. Ask me how I know. So pop the prongs from your badge, from your tag through. Make sure it's straight, just if it needs any little tiny adjustments, make sure it's straight. Now some people like to put a little bit of glue behind them. I've never felt the need to do that. I've got woven interfacing and foam interfacing here, so I don't feel like I need to add an extra piece of Peltex, because I don't think that that's going to pull out. If you do feel that you've used fusible fleece or something like that and it feels a little bit less sturdy, you can pop a little drop of stiff interfacing, or a little bit of a spare bit of faux leather. Even a bit of stiffish card over the top there will help to give it stabilisation, but I don't feel I need that. I'm just going to pop the washer on the back, holding it down so that it sits nice and tight, because you want it to be flush with the front. I'm going to push both of the prongs outwards, and I always push them outwards rather than inwards, because if I push them inwards they tend to overlap a little bit, so you'll get just a tiny bit of overlap, and this top edge here catches, and I just think eventually it will wear a hole in your lining. That's always going to be the possible issue. So this is what we use, a bit of Bag Maker's Friend, duct tape. And yes, my duct tape is covered in flamingos. Over the back, just gives you a bit of added security, and it gets rid of all of those possible sharp edges. So you're getting rid of all of the opportunities for that piece of hardware to wear holes in your lining. So happy to see my handmade tag sitting there. I'm just going to get rid of my stray threads, and I'm also just going to trim up. I've got a little bit of foam that's poking out the top there. I don't want that there. It's just a tiny silver smidgen. So I've got my 2 panels joined together, and I've got them laid in front of me, and I'm going to take my zipper and I'm going to position my zipper over the left hand tab at the top. Excuse me. So I'm laying it right sides down so that the lining zipper tab is on the top, and the zipper tab on the main exterior fabric is underneath. I'm just going to clip it. You want your zipper to be at 90 degrees to the tab so that you know it's nice and straight. I'm taking it over to the machine, and I'm going to stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So you've already got a line of stitching there, so just follow the same line of stitching. Just a couple of back stitches at the beginning and the end, just to make sure that it's nice and secure. Then I'm going to open that zipper up. I'm going to pop the lining zipper facing down, the lining zipper tab down, so that all of the seam allowance is basically inserted in between those two pieces. So the seam allowance from everything is now facing towards the exterior panel, and I'm going to top stitch across the end of the tab, holding all of those pieces together at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now you can see. So my zipper is now attached. Excuse these threads, I'll get rid of those. And we have the zipper tab on the back, the lining zipper tab on the back there. Let's get rid of those threads. Now we're going to take our zipper and we're going to do exactly the same thing with the other end of the zipper, making sure that our zipper isn't twisted. And this is where you can see you kind of almost fold in on yourself. So your lining and your foam are almost two separate entities at this point. Make sure it's nice and straight. And again, you're going to, let's just line it up properly. Stitch across the end of both of the tabs and the zipper at 1/4 inch seam allowance, following the same line as you've already stitched. You're going to open that up, pushing the lining tab down. And you're going to top stitch across at 1/8 of an inch. Helps if your thread doesn't come out of your machine. Let's try that one again. See, it happens to the best of us, these things. At least I notice straight away. Sometimes I can continue to sew for ages without any thread in the machine. Then you feel very foolish. So there we go. That's our zipper attached between the two tabs, and the two lining tabs are now sitting perfectly.